I didn't think my marriage would unravel in silence. People imagine endings as explosions, screaming matches, slammed doors, accusations thrown like glass across a room. They imagine a single moment you can point to and say, "That's when it broke." Mine didn't break like that. Mine cracked quietly at 5:15 every morning, while the rest of the house slept. I would wake before dawn, my body already aching, my mind already racing through schedules and deadlines. I packed my son's lunch in the dim kitchen light. I laid out his clothes. I brewed coffee strong enough to pretend I wasn't exhausted. By 6:30, I was waking him gently, smiling like everything was fine. By 7:45, I was dropping him off at school. By 8:15, I was logged into my job, managing teams, budgets, and crises across 2 time zones. And every single morning when I came back home, the house was quiet. Too quiet. My husband's bedroom door was closed. Downstairs, the nanny, someone I had hired to help him, was already moving around, feeding our daughter, getting her dressed, starting laundry. Around 9:30, sometimes 10, I'd hear footsteps. My husband would finally come downstairs, stretch like the day had just begun, make himself an elaborate breakfast, and sit at the table scrolling through his phone. By then, I was already deep into meetings, already responsible for everyone but myself. And somehow, I was the villain. He told me I ruined his life, that I didn't understand how hard it was to manage a household, that I had it easy because I just sat at a desk all day. I believed him longer than I should have, because I love my kids, because I grew up watching my mother do everything alone, because I told myself sacrifice was what strong women did. But there's a difference between sacrifice and erasure. And the night I finally realized which one I was living, I was sitting alone in my home office, lights off, talking to the dogs because they were the only ones who still listened. That was the moment I understood something terrifying. I wasn't burning out. I was disappearing. And the person blaming me for it was sleeping peacefully upstairs. My name is Renee, and I'm 41. If you met me today, hair pulled back, laptop open, calendar packed, you might assume I've always been this composed, this together. The kind of woman who speaks in calm sentences even when her mind is on fire. The kind of woman who can juggle a million responsibilities without dropping anything. But I wasn't born this way. I was built this way by years of survival. Most of my 20s were not glamorous. There were no inspirational morning routines, no vision boards, no cute little hustle quotes pinned to my wall. There were warehouse shifts, deliveries, and the kind of exhaustion that sinks into your bones so deep you stop remembering what rested feels like. The pay was bad, the hours were worse. I'd come home smelling like dust and cardboard, hands rough, back aching, and I'd stare at the ceiling some nights thinking, is this it? Is this what my whole life is going to be? When I turned 28, I made a decision that scared me more than any overtime shift ever had. I went back to school, not because it was easy, because it was the only way out. I enrolled in computer science at a local community college first. I was older than most people in my classes. I didn't have parents paying my rent. I didn't have time to find myself. I had bills. I had survival. 2 years later, I transferred to a state university. And those 4 years, I don't even know how to explain them without my chest tightening. I worked overnight shifts at a logistics company. I'd get home at 6 a.m., sleep maybe 3 hours, sometimes less, then drag myself to class with caffeine and sheer willpower. Weekends? I picked up extra shifts at a hardware store. I lived on to-do lists. I measured my life in deadlines and sore feet. There were nights I cried in the shower because it was the only place no one could see me falling apart. And then, during one of those years, I met Dylan. He was 36, charming in a soft way, not loud, not flashy, the kind of man who looked you in the eyes when you spoke, like you mattered. He wasn't rich. He wasn't some perfect prince. But he made me feel seen. He worked steadily at the time, and when we started dating, he'd bring me food on nights I studied late. He'd rub my shoulders when I came home too tired to speak. He'd tell me, "You're doing something incredible," and I'd believe him because I wanted to. We got married when I was 30. The wedding wasn't a fairy tale. It was modest, practical, like most of my life had been. But I remember standing there, looking at him, thinking, finally, I built something stable. I built a home. At the time, Dylan worked as a dental assistant, making around $35,000 a year. He'd been talking about becoming a dental hygienist, which would push his income closer to $65,000, and when he told me that dream, I didn't laugh. I didn't dismiss it. I didn't tell him it was unrealistic. I told him to go for it, because I understood what it meant to want more. So I did what I always did. I carried the weight without making it obvious. I picked up extra weekend shifts. I took on freelance coding work when my brain was already fried. I covered his tuition and our rent, telling myself it was temporary, telling myself it was an investment in our future. He finished the program 2 years later, right before our first child was born. Our son came into the world like a meteor, bright, loud, life-altering. And after that, Dylan looked at me with tired eyes and said he wanted to stay home. Daycare was brutally expensive, and there was something about the way he said it, like he wanted permission, like he wanted to be the kind of parent who was present. That softened me. I had just landed a job as a software developer, making around $72,000. It was tight. We weren't rich, but we could breathe. So I said yes. I told him, stay home, be with him. We'll make it work. 2 years later, we had our daughter, and Dylan never went back to work. At first, I didn't push, because in my head, it made sense. 2 kids, 1 income, a stay-at-home parent to hold everything together. I told myself he was doing the invisible labor that no one applauds. And for a while, it looked like he was. The house wasn't perfect, but it felt lived in. The kids were fed, there were routines, there was normalness. Then I got obsessed with climbing higher, because money had always been a pressure on my throat. Last year, I decided to get a master's degree in data science online while working full-time. 18 months. I barely slept. I finished in March, and by April, everything changed. A bigger tech company recruited me and offered $160,000 base, plus annual bonuses that usually hit around $20,000. For the first time in my life, money wasn't a constant panic in my body. I remember sitting in my car after signing the offer, hands trembling, not from fear, but from relief. I thought, now we can breathe. Now Dylan won't feel overwhelmed. Now we can be happy again. And that's when the timing turned cruel. Because around the same time, Patricia, my mother-in-law, had a health scare, a hip surgery, months of recovery. She'd been helping with the kids 2 or 3 days a week, giving Dylan a break. Without her, Dylan started saying he was drowning. He said the kids were too much. He said he needed help. So I looked at our new budget and did what I always do. I solved the problem with a spreadsheet. I hired a nanny. Rebecca, early 50s, incredible references, Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. She watched our daughter while our son was in school. She helped with light housework and meal prep. It cost $3,200 a month, and I paid it, gladly, because I thought I was buying peace. I thought I was buying teamwork. I didn't realize I was paying someone else to live the life my husband claimed was crushing him. And I didn't realize the quiet resentment in our home had already started growing teeth. The first thing I noticed wasn't anger. It was silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that presses against your ears until you realize something is wrong. 2 months after I went fully remote for work, my days developed a rhythm so precise it almost felt rehearsed. I woke at 5:15 a.m., showered quietly, packed lunches, laid out clothes, and coaxed my son awake with a softness I didn't have for myself anymore. By 7:45, I was dropping him off at school, waving until he disappeared through the doors. By 8 o'clock, I was home again. And every morning, the house felt like it was holding its breath. Dylan's bedroom door stayed closed. Rebecca arrived around 8 o'clock, cheerful and competent, immediately getting my daughter fed, dressed, and engaged. I logged into work by 8:15, camera on, voice steady, juggling meetings with people who had no idea my marriage was slowly unraveling 20 feet away. Around 9:30, sometimes 10 o'clock, sometimes later, I'd hear it. A door opening upstairs. Footsteps. Dylan would wander down like the day had just started for him. He'd greet Rebecca casually, pour himself coffee, and make breakfast. Not quick toast or cereal, but full plates. Eggs, pancakes, smoothies. He'd sit at the kitchen table, phone in hand, scrolling endlessly. At first, I told myself I was catching him on off days. Everyone needs rest. Everyone has rough nights. But then it happened again. And again. Every single weekday. I'd be on video calls, listening to Rebecca read stories to my daughter downstairs, hearing laundry running, hearing dishes clink, while Dylan laughed quietly at something on his phone. One afternoon, between meetings, I walked downstairs to grab lunch. Dylan was still sitting at the table, breakfast dishes untouched, eyes glued to a shopping app. "How's your day going?" I asked lightly. He looked up like I'd accused him of something. "I've been running around nonstop," he said sharply. "I'm exhausted." I glanced at the clock. 2 p.m. Rebecca was outside with my daughter. The house was calm, still. I nodded and went back upstairs, but something lodged itself in my chest. Later that week, I asked Rebecca, casually, carefully, if she needed anything before my next meeting. She smiled and said no. Then she hesitated. Oh, she added gently, I've been getting your daughter dressed and fed every morning since I started, just so you know. My stomach tightened. What time does Dylan usually come down? I asked. Rebecca paused, clearly uncomfortable. Usually between 9:30 and 10:30, she said. Sometimes later. The next day I called Patricia. I didn't accuse, I didn't rant, I just asked, when you come over in the mornings, is Dylan usually awake? There was a brief silence. Well, she said slowly, he's usually still in bed. I assumed he'd been up late or wasn't feeling well. That's when I stopped guessing. I started tracking. For 3 weeks I paid attention. Not obsessively, not angrily, just factually. Out of 15 workdays, Dylan was up before 9:30 a.m. exactly 2 times. On Fridays, he sometimes slept until 11 o'clock. I need to be clear about something. I never expected him to wake up at 5 o'clock like me, but our son was at school. Our daughter was being cared for by a nanny I paid for. Patricia helped twice a week, so I kept asking myself quietly, privately, what is he so exhausted from? Meanwhile, my responsibilities kept stacking. I managed all our finances, every bill, every budget, every payment. I handled car maintenance, home repairs, warranties. I scheduled doctor appointments. I coordinated pet care for our dogs. I even helped Patricia financially, sending her $400 a month to cover medical bills her insurance didn't fully pay. Dylan knew. He said it was the right thing to do. But whenever I mentioned being tired, just mentioned it, he jumped in immediately. You don't understand what it's like to manage a household. You have it easy. You sit at a desk all day. You get to leave the house. I stopped responding, because arguing felt pointless, because defending myself made me feel like I was begging to be seen, and because somewhere deep inside, a quiet, dangerous thought began forming. If I disappeared tomorrow, would anything actually change for him? That thought scared me more than anything else. The moment everything broke didn't come with shouting. It came with a sentence so casual it almost slipped past me, until it landed. I had been running on fumes for weeks. My new role came with bigger responsibilities, and one project in particular was unraveling fast. Client escalations, late-night fixes, back-to-back calls that blurred together until I couldn't remember what day it was. One week, I worked until 2 a.m. every night, 5 nights in a row. I slept 4 hours, woke at 5:15, and kept moving because that's what I've always done. My body felt heavy, like gravity had doubled. My head throbbed constantly. Even coffee tasted wrong. One morning, I came downstairs looking exactly how I felt. Eyes hollow, shoulders slumped, hair pulled back without care. Dylan glanced up from his phone. What's wrong with you? He asked. I'm just tired, I said. My voice cracked slightly, and I hated that it did. The deadline's been rough. He snorted. You should try being me for a day, he said. Then you'd know what real tired feels like. Something in my chest tightened. I didn't respond. I just picked up my mug and walked back upstairs, closing the door to my office with more force than I meant to. That night, lying awake in my office instead of our bed, I replayed the comment over and over. Not because it was cruel, though it was, but because it wasn't new. For 2 years, Dylan had been saying versions of the same thing. You ruined my opportunities. I could have had a real career if it weren't for the kids. I gave up everything. Every time he said it, he looked at me like I was the thief, like I had taken something from him. I tried to talk about it once, really talk. I told him I felt blamed for choices we made together. He shut down, changed the subject. If I pushed, he got angry. His parents suggested therapy. My parents did too. Patricia begged him gently to talk to someone. Dylan always said he didn't need it, or that he'd look into it. He never did. What disappeared slowly, quietly, was us. The conversations faded first, then the laughter, then the intimacy. In the last year, we'd had sex maybe 5 times. 5. I told myself it was stress, fatigue, parenthood. I blamed my body, my age, my weight, my ambition, anything that meant I didn't have to ask the harder question. Did he still want me? I never looked elsewhere. I never even thought about it. I believed loyalty meant endurance. Then one afternoon, I was on a video call when I heard Dylan laughing downstairs, really laughing. Bright, easy, alive. It wasn't with me. I muted my mic and just sat there, staring at my screen, listening to him sound like someone I barely recognized. That night, after the kids were asleep, I finally asked the question I'd been avoiding. Are you happy? I asked quietly. He didn't hesitate. No, he said, and I haven't been for a long time. My heart pounded. Is it me? I asked. He sighed dramatically, like I was asking something obvious. You don't get it, he said. My life could have been so different. I waited. You ruined it, he added. The words felt physical, like something hitting me square in the chest. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just nodded. And in that moment, something fundamental shifted. Not because he blamed me, but because he said it without doubt, without hesitation, as if my existence was the explanation for everything he hated about his life. That was the moment I realized. This wasn't about stress. This wasn't about exhaustion. This was about resentment that had been fermenting for years, and it wasn't going away. After Dylan said it, you ruined my life, I didn't explode. That's what surprises people when I tell this part. I didn't throw anything. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't storm out of the room. I went quiet. Because when you've spent most of your life holding things together, your first instinct isn't chaos, it's containment. I sat there on the edge of the couch, hands folded in my lap, breathing carefully like I was afraid the wrong inhale might crack me open. My heart was pounding so loudly, I was sure he could hear it. I stared at the coffee table because if I looked at him, I knew I'd cry, and I refused to let him see that. I didn't force you, I said finally. My voice sounded distant, even to me. You chose to stay home. He shook his head. You don't understand, he said. You don't understand anything. That phrase, you don't understand, was his favorite shield. He used it to end conversations, to invalidate anything I said before it could fully exist. I supported your schooling, I continued. I worked extra shifts. I paid your tuition. I never once told you not to work. I still wouldn't. He didn't answer that. Instead, he turned it into a competition. You sit at a desk all day, he said. I manage a house and kids. You wouldn't last a week. Something inside me flinched. Because the truth was, I already was managing the house. I just wasn't allowed to say it out loud. That night, I didn't sleep in our bed. I told him I had an early call and didn't want to disturb him. It was a lie that felt easier than explaining the truth. That lying next to him felt lonelier than being alone. Over the next few days, I tried to understand him. I replayed everything in my head, like I could reverse engineer where things went wrong. Did I push too hard? Did I stop listening? Was I absent emotionally because I was always working? I started noticing how often I apologized for being tired, for needing quiet, for not being more patient. I apologized for things that weren't mine to carry. One afternoon, Patricia came over and found me sitting in my car in the driveway after school drop-off. I'd just finished a brutal client call and needed a moment before logging into work. She knocked on my window. Are you okay? She asked. I'm fine, I said automatically. She looked at me, the way mothers look when they know their child is lying. Later that week, she asked gently if everything was okay between Dylan and me. I told her we were working through some things. She nodded, but her eyes said she didn't believe me. At night, after the kids were asleep, I'd sit on the floor of my office with our dogs. I'd talk out loud about deadlines, money, exhaustion, because they listened without judgment. It sounds pathetic, but those conversations kept me grounded. Dylan and I barely spoke. When we did, it was transactional. Schedules, groceries, logistics. And when I tried, really tried, to talk about how disconnected I felt, he turned it into another comparison. You think you're anxious? He'd say. Try being responsible for everyone else. I started sleeping in my office more often. Not because I wanted distance, because I needed peace. The realization crept in slowly, like a bruise you don't notice until you touch it. I spent more time with my children than with my husband. I knew their routines, their fears, their little expressions. I was present for their lives. But the person I married felt like a stranger who resented me for existing. And still I stayed, because love doesn't disappear just because it's hurting. Because I wanted my kids to grow up with both parents. Because some part of me believed if I just tried harder, something would shift. I didn't know then that the next confrontation wouldn't just test our marriage. It would force me to see it exactly as it was. The escalation didn't arrive all at once. It arrived in waves, small at first, then relentless, until I couldn't tell where my own emotions ended and everyone else's expectations began. It started with the post. I hadn't planned to show Dylan. I didn't even know why I wrote it. Maybe I needed proof that I wasn't imagining things, that the exhaustion I felt had a shape outside my own head. I stripped away names, details, anything identifying. I just told the truth as plainly as I could and asked strangers if I was losing my mind. The responses flooded in faster than I expected. Validation, concern, hard questions, and guilt. because reading those comments made something undeniable settle in my chest. This wasn't normal. That Saturday night, after the kids were asleep, I opened my laptop and turned it toward Dylan. "You need to read this," I said. He scrolled in silence. His face went red, then tight. When he reached the end, he didn't look at me. He stood up, grabbed his keys, and walked out. No explanation. No goodbye. He drove to his sister Marianne's house, 40 minutes away, and stayed there. That first night alone with the kids felt strangely familiar. I bathed them, read stories, cleaned the kitchen, packed lunches. It was identical to every other night, except Dylan wasn't upstairs on his phone. Sunday came and went. I took the kids to the park. I cooked. I helped with a school project. I called Dylan once. No answer. Monday morning, the routine resumed. Drop off. Log in. Rebecca arrived and asked casually where Dylan was. "He's with his sister for a few days," I said. She nodded. No follow-up questions. But the look she gave me lingered longer than necessary. Tuesday afternoon, Dylan finally called. He wanted to take the kids to Marianne's. I said no. Not because I wanted control, but because our kids had school, routines, stability. Because uprooting them to stay in a crowded house an hour away made no sense. He yelled. Said I couldn't keep him from his kids. I stayed calm. "The kids stay here," I said. "You can take space. They don't need chaos." He hung up. An hour later, Patricia called. Dylan had called her, trying to enlist her help. She sided with me. That night, Dylan called again, calmer this time. He said he needed space to think. I told him he could take it. But the kids were staying. He came back 9 days later. I was on a video call when I heard the front door open at 1:30 p.m. Footsteps. Drawers. The sound of someone reclaiming space. Then my office door opened. He stood there, staring at me while I was mid-sentence with my team. I muted myself, turned off the camera. "What do you need?" I asked quietly. "We need to talk." "I'm in a meeting." He didn't move. "I'll be done in 30 minutes, some chance," I said. He walked away, leaving the door open. I wrapped up the call as fast as I could. Downstairs, he was sitting at the kitchen table. Patricia was in the living room folding laundry. She looked at me, nodded once, and quietly left through the front door, giving us privacy I hadn't asked for but desperately needed. Dylan started by accusing me of humiliating him. I told him I needed an outside perspective because he wouldn't talk to me. He said I didn't understand his life. I said I was trying, and he kept shutting me out. He blamed his lost career again. I reminded him, calmly, that he could go back to work tomorrow if he wanted. We could afford daycare now. He didn't respond. We talked for 3.5 hours. At one point, Rebecca brought my daughter back from the park, and I asked her to stay an extra hour. I paid her overtime later. By the end, we were both exhausted. Dylan said he wanted to try. I said so did I, but things had to change. That night, after the kids were asleep, we drank wine and talked more. We cried, separately, not together. Around midnight, we ended up in bed. For a moment, I believed we'd turned a corner. The next morning, I woke at 5:15. Dylan was still asleep. I went through the routine, drop off, log in. At 10:20 a.m., I heard his door open. I stared at my monitor and realized I wasn't actually seeing anything. Over the weekend, I tried to revisit the conversation. He got defensive. Said his week at his sister's had been awful. Said everyone else's life was easier than his. And standing there in the kitchen, something in my chest finally gave out. "You're not the person I married," I said. He asked what that was supposed to mean. "The man I married didn't keep score," I said. "He didn't make me feel like everything I do is worthless." He walked away, and I understood then this wasn't a rough patch. This was a fracture, one that had been growing quietly, patiently, waiting. The darkest moment didn't come with a fight. It came with acceptance, the kind that feels like sinking. After that last conversation, the house settled into something hollow, not tense, empty. Dylan and I stopped arguing because there was nothing left to argue about. We were polite in front of the kids, efficient, civil. Roommates. I moved my things fully into the guest room and told him it was because I'd been working late and didn't want to disturb his sleep. He didn't question it. I think part of him was relieved. That hurt more than any argument ever had. Most nights, I fell asleep at my desk or on the couch, laptop still open, emails half read. The dogs curled up beside me like quiet sentinels. I stopped talking to them about my problems, not because things were better, but because I was too tired to explain them anymore. Rebecca noticed. She never said anything outright, but sometimes she lingered at the door when she left, like she wanted to ask if I was okay. Patricia noticed too. One afternoon, she found me sitting in the garage after work, just staring at the wall. "You don't look fine," she said softly when I told her I was. I didn't argue. Inside, I felt flat, not sad, not angry, just depleted. Dylan's routine never changed. He still slept until late morning, still scrolled, still cooked and claimed exhaustion. And I stopped expecting anything different. That was the shift that scared me most, because hope had finally left the room. At night, I lay awake thinking about the kids, about my son asking where Daddy was when Dylan stayed out late at his sister's, about my daughter curling into me at bedtime, her little hand gripping my sleeve like I was the anchor holding everything in place. I thought about divorce. I didn't say the word out loud, but it lived in my head. I spoke to attorneys, 3 of them. I learned the process, the timelines, custody realities. One even drafted a settlement proposal. It sat in a folder on my computer, unopened after the first time. I wasn't angry enough to file. I wasn't strong enough to leave. And I wasn't okay enough to stay the way things were. The lowest night came quietly. It was nearly 11 p.m. The house was dark. Dylan was upstairs, probably on his phone. I sat in my office with the lights off, staring at nothing. I realized I hadn't cried in weeks, not because I was healing, but because I had gone numb. That scared me. Because numbness isn't strength, it's survival mode. And survival mode isn't meant to last forever. I asked myself a question I'd been avoiding. If nothing ever changes, can I live like this? The answer came immediately. Yes, I could. And that terrified me more than any other realization, because it meant I was capable of disappearing slowly, quietly, without making a sound. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't cry. I just made a decision. Not the brave one, not the dramatic one, but the one that felt necessary in that moment. The turning point wasn't heroic. There was no dramatic confrontation, no suitcase by the door, no speech where I reclaimed my power in a single, cinematic moment. It was quieter than that. It happened at 11 p.m., sitting alone in my office, the house asleep around me. The kids soft breathing down the hall, the faint glow from my monitor, the hum of a world that would keep moving whether I made a decision or not. I stopped asking what should happen next, and I asked a harder question. What can I live with? I had been circling divorce for weeks. I knew the legal process, the numbers, custody schedules. I knew I could leave and still provide. I knew I'd be fair, more than fair. I wasn't afraid of the logistics. I was afraid of the aftermath. I pictured my son asking where Daddy was. I pictured my daughter not understanding why bedtime suddenly happened in 2 houses. I pictured their routines splintering, their sense of safety shaken, not because of abuse or chaos, but because 2 adults couldn't find each other anymore. And then there was Dylan. As much resentment as I carried, I couldn't ignore what I'd seen over the years. The unresolved postpartum depression screenings, the appointments I scheduled that he canceled, the way he avoided help like it was a verdict instead of a lifeline. Patricia had said something a week earlier that stuck with me. He doesn't know how to ask for help, she'd said. He never has. That didn't excuse the way he treated me, but it explained why leaving him right now felt less like liberation and more like abandonment. So I made a decision I never thought I would. I decided not to file. Not now. Maybe not ever. I wasn't choosing happiness. I was choosing stability. The next morning, I didn't announce anything. I didn't sit Dylan down for a big talk. I simply moved the rest of my things into the guest room. When he asked why, I told him I'd been working late and didn't want to disturb him. He nodded. No argument. No protest. Just acceptance. And somehow that confirmed everything. We became functional. 2 adults sharing a house, raising kids, coordinating schedules, polite, distant, efficient. I stopped expecting emotional connection from him. I stopped hoping he'd wake up one day different. That was the real turning point. Not staying, but letting go of expectation. I protected myself quietly. I opened a separate bank account, just in case. I started setting aside $2,000 a month, money Dylan didn't know about, not to punish him, not to plan an escape, but to ensure that if something changed, I wouldn't be trapped. It was the first boundary I'd drawn in years, and it felt like oxygen. Work kept moving forward. I got the promotion, a $45,000 raise. My base jumped to $205,000, I told Dylan. He said congratulations, then went back to his phone. That was the moment I stopped measuring my worth by his reactions. I adjusted my life instead. I started running in the mornings, waking at 4:45, lacing my shoes in the dark, breathing cold air into my lungs before the day swallowed me whole. 3 miles, every morning. It cleared my head in a way nothing else could. I drank less. I stopped venting. To the dogs, to the walls, to myself. I focused on what I could control. The kids were thriving. My son excelled in school. My daughter laughed easily. They didn't sense the fracture between us because we protected them from it. We smiled. We were kind. We didn't fight in front of them. From the outside, everything looked fine. And in a way, it was. Not happy, but stable. I consulted one of the attorneys again. Not to leave, but to ask how couples like us survive long term. He said it was more common than people admitted. Marriages that turned into partnerships. Coexistence. Quiet endurance until the kids were older. It's not ideal, he said, but it's real. I accepted that. Not because I believed it was right, but because for now, it was what I could carry. The strangest part? Once I stopped fighting reality, the constant ache in my chest eased. I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't hoping. I was simply here. And sometimes, survival looks like choosing the path that hurts the least, not the one that heals the most. The fallout didn't come with screaming or shattered glass. It arrived quietly, through shifts in tone, through doors that closed without slamming, through the slow realization that consequences don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they simply settle. Once I stopped asking Dylan to change, something subtle happened. The tension drained out of the house. Not because things were better, but because I wasn't pulling anymore. I stopped initiating conversations that went nowhere. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped defending my exhaustion. I didn't ask how his day was unless it mattered to the kids. I didn't correct him when he exaggerated how busy he'd been. I didn't challenge the narrative. I let reality speak for itself. And it did. Patricia noticed first. She came over one afternoon and watched Dylan drift between rooms, phone in hand, moving like a guest instead of a parent. She watched Rebecca do laundry, prep snacks, and coax my daughter into her shoes. She watched me log off work and slide seamlessly into homework help, bath time, bedtime stories. Later, while Dylan was upstairs, Patricia stood at the sink and said quietly, "I see it now." I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't need to. Rebecca noticed too. She started checking in with me more than with Dylan, asking about schedules, school events, doctor appointments. Not out of disrespect, out of clarity. She knew who kept the house running. Even Dylan noticed. He never said it outright, but I could feel the shift. The way he lingered in doorways. The way he seemed unsettled when I no longer reacted. When I didn't rise to his comparisons. When I didn't take the bait. There's a strange power in stepping back. Because when you stop absorbing blame, it has nowhere to go. Dylan tried once to restart the old dynamic. He complained one night about how hard everything felt, how exhausted he was, how invisible. I listened. I nodded. And I didn't fix it. "I hear you," I said simply. No reassurance, no apology, no offer to carry more. The silence after that felt different, uncomfortable. For him. He didn't fall apart. There was no dramatic reckoning. But I watched something subtle happen. His narrative no longer had an audience. Friends drifted. Not because I told anyone anything, but because Dylan stopped showing up the way he used to. He missed commitments. He canceled plans. He withdrew. Meanwhile, my life, ironically, expanded. Not socially, not romantically. Internally. I slept better in this guest room. I woke up earlier to run. I felt stronger, clearer, less hollow. At work, I thrived. The promotion came with visibility, respect, and momentum. Colleagues sought my input. Teams relied on me. I wasn't just surviving. I was leading. And the strangest thing? No one collapsed when I stopped overfunctioning at home. The kids were fine. The house still ran. The world didn't end. The truth had always been this. I wasn't holding everything together because it would fall apart without me. I was holding it together because no one else would step in. Once I stepped back emotionally, the imbalance became obvious. To everyone but Dylan. And eventually, even to him. There was no revenge. No triumph. Just a quiet redistribution of truth. And I walked through it calmly. Head high, heart guarded, dignity intact. This isn't a story about walking away. It's a story about staying without disappearing. I wish I could tell you there was a perfect ending. That Dylan woke up one morning different. That he apologized, sought help, met me where I stood. That we rebuilt something stronger from the wreckage. That didn't happen. What did happen was quieter, and, in its own way, just as transformative. I stopped waiting. I stopped hoping that love meant endurance without limits. I stopped believing that being strong meant absorbing everything without complaint. I learned that sacrifice, when it isn't shared, becomes self-erasure. My children didn't need me to be a martyr. They needed me to be present. And I finally understood that stability doesn't only come from staying married, it comes from emotional consistency, safety, and truth. I gave them that every morning, every bedtime, every calm smile that wasn't forced. Dylan and I coexist now. We are polite, functional. We raise our kids together. There is no war in our home, no screaming, no bitterness spoken aloud. And that, for now, is enough. Not forever, just for now. I've learned to measure my life differently, not by whether someone else appreciates my effort, but by whether I respect the way I'm living. I protect my energy, I guard my finances, I maintain my health. I no longer explain why I'm tired or justify why I matter. I matter because I exist. And maybe one day, when the kids are older, I'll choose something different. Maybe I'll leave. Maybe I'll rebuild in a way that centers joy instead of endurance. Or maybe this chapter will simply close quietly when it's done teaching me what I needed to learn. The lesson isn't that staying is noble or that leaving is brave. The lesson is this. You are allowed to stop pouring yourself into a container that never fills back up. You are allowed to redefine what strength looks like. And sometimes healing doesn't look like a clean break. It looks like drawing boundaries so carefully, so deliberately, that you finally have room to breathe again. This wasn't the life I imagined, but it's a life I'm surviving with clarity, dignity, and self-respect. And for now, that's enough.